So this is a summary of work that I've done at the farm, my parents' farm, over the past couple of years. Um, so the first thing we're going to do is just take a look at removal of a beaver dam that we found holding back water up on, it was a little bit north of our farm, but at Martin Drainage Ditch number 3. So this view is just from my drone and kind of hovering right in front of the dam. And we'll get a little bit of perspective in a minute, but this is a shot just showing the size of the dam, and the water is probably up at least 4 feet or so. Kind of interesting. In the upper right, there's a little mink running around. So this is a still shot of the dam, and then my son Mitchell, we came up to take it out. So this is him standing in front, and then after we've taken out part of it, he's standing in there pulling out the rest of it. So that was quite a job, and then after we got done, we ended up with the rest of the dam. So we're moving on to taking out brush and trees from the south drainage ditch. They were quite overgrown. So the first part of this is going to be a drone flyover of the south ditch, starting at the south end of the ditch. So probably up at about 50, 75 feet. So we're going to fly into it and the end of it, and then turn around and fly down the length of it to the Highway 52 bridge. One interesting thing you can see is that on the left, the water level is up, and about right in the middle of this picture, there's another beaver dam, which we ended up taking out. After a few more months, we had an excavator come in and pull that out. So that water, again, is up about 3 or 4 feet right there. So you can see how many, on the left we have large trees here, on the right we have some more large trees. And these trees, we're up at 50, 75 feet or so, don't look that large, but but they are 30 to 40 feet high in places, so they're pretty good size. And of course we're in the winter time, so there's not a lot of foliage there, but yeah, I guess we're moving into the larger trees right now. They're at the 30, 40 feet. So they've been there growing for quite a long time. That area on the left was actually, it was just a tangled mess at the water as well. When you got in there, it was like literally a jungle. It was just all tangled up. So we had to stand in the water and cut each one out branch by branch. So that was the thickest part of it as far as trees go. And then we come on down the ditch and we have more smaller trees on both sides. And then we get into mainly just honeysuckle on either side with twisted, thick branches. They're very difficult to cut because you cut one, and then it's like you have the others are kind of spring-loaded around the one you just cut. So it's kind of difficult, and then you have to crawl underneath them to cut them because they're kind of a low canopy type of brush. So you can see how the ditch needed maintenance right at the bottom of this. You can see where it's the erosion's kind of filled in the ditch, and then in a couple places you can see the drainage tile. You can see the white outlet. That's a larger one into the ditch. A little bit larger trees coming up here. I believe that's what I call perhaps Coyote Corner, where we had a dead coyote. We'll see that in some future pictures here, but some larger trees like 12, 14, 16 inch diameter trunks as we go through here. So when I cut them, and I just walked, just kind of hiked down the ditch to cut these, but just cut them, and basically at that time just let them fall in. And this is honeysuckle right here on the left. It was kind of a twisted mess to go through. And then quite a bit of erosion. You can see where the bank has fallen in and then kind of flowed into the channel there. So now we're coming up to the bridge, and that's the extent of the ditch. So going back a little bit, we have what I call Coyote Corner, and there just happened to be a dead coyote there. It was actually fairly fresh as far as dead animals go. right before I cut that tree down, and there was an outlet there. So after I got done with the cutting, then I did another flyover. And so again, this is starting at the south end again. You can see where where briefly where the dam was gone, Beaver Dam, and then there's my Case 580 backhoe. I pulled out some of the trees here and started stacking them, but you can see a lot of the trees are just have fallen into the ditch, and so that's another phase of the project coming up here in the video, where we basically took either the Case 580 full-size backhoe or my smaller BX 2300 Kubota four-wheel drive backhoe and pulled these things out one at a time, basically. So you can see on the left there's some of the very long-term drainage areas that just never drain, and so we'll talk about those later. We fixed a lot of those problems, but that particular area that we just looked at still has an issue, and I think a solution. So again, some of it's pulled out, and others sitting there. So we got the Kubota with my son Matt, and this next shot is just us kind of driving along. I'm riding on the back, taking video, just kind of taking a look at what we see after we pulled off some of the brush. On the right, you can see the tree stumps from one of the most overgrown areas where we cut the trees, and I pulled most of those out in the pile on the right. So this is just kind of a ground level view of the ditch, showing how much we cleared it out compared to what it was before, which is totally overgrown. That's my hand. So this is typical for both the large backhoe and for the Kubota, but this is just one instance where we had have a large piece of brush, honeysuckle, in the ditch, and so what we did was put a chain on the front bucket of the Kubota, and then Matt's driving it, and then I would go down, basically put some tension on the chain, and then kind of lower myself into the ditch. This is where I cut off. You can see there's several branches basically that make up the stump, and then I would wrap the logging chain around the stumps that I cut, or the branches that I cut, and then cinch them together, and then put some tension on them, and then I would work with Matt to bring these up and out of the ditch. So it wasn't a super easy process, so I'm telling him I need a little bit more chain to get around this group of branches and get it tangled up enough that it'll all kind of pull together once I cinch it here. So that's what I'm doing, trying to pull it tight, cinch it. I'll put a little tension on it. I'll have him raise it so that there's tension on it, and I'll use that to actually pull myself out of the ditch, and then Matt will actually put it in reverse and see if we can pull this out.
This one will be heavy.
Yeah, it's heavy.
It'll be heavy.
So it's a bunch, and it's kind of stuck in the water here. So he's going to try backing it up and seeing how far we can get. I'm telling him to lower the bucket so we have a little bit more direct force and we don't pull the tractor over.
Not that much.
So that's really heavy, and I'm like, let's see if we can lift it above. And Matt hasn't done a lot of that, so I'm gonna actually clear this out and then trade places with him.
Raise it up.
Oh, sorry.
You got to get it over the edge.
Yes, we do need to get it over the edge. Getting a little bit excited here, but all right. So I think I'll show him the technique for getting this out. So I'll go ahead and raise it up a little bit. get it over the edge, and then kind of give it a yank over the edge, and go ahead and pull it out onto the bank. And once we get it out over the bank, we're going to disconnect the chain, leave the brush there, and then we'll pile it together, and we'll see that in a video after another couple minutes or so. Yeah, that was a tough one. It's actually bigger than it looks right there, and pretty heavy. So I also use the full-size backhoe to attach to larger trees. This is one that the motor would not drag by itself. It's too big. So I would hook it up to either the bucket or the back, and then pull it along to where we could stack it later. So this is the south end of the ditch. On the left are stumps from what I've cut. On the right are the trees that I pulled out of the ditch with the Case 580. So this is just a ground level view showing the extent of what we pulled out. So there's a lot of driving back and forth along the ditch, taking stuff out. So I'm going to look back. So that was one of our burn piles. We'll see that a little bit later. So like I said, once we'd pile brush along the side of the ditch, then I would actually take the large backhoe, and it had enough power generally to take these smaller piles, and then I just scrape the bucket along the ground, and then push the different smaller piles of brush into a larger pile, and then that would become our burn pile, where we would basically burn it in place later on. So we actually made some pretty good sized piles, but this is a good way to do it as opposed to individually dragging each piece to a central location. So we just decided what made sense as far as number of burn piles, and ended up with probably 7 or 8 or more burn piles, and then basically we ended up setting them on fire, dousing them with basically lighter fluid to get it started, and then in most cases the brush was dry enough that it got on fire. It was set on fire, and then once we got it burning, it was not too hard just to keep piling it together, and then until it was totally burned up. So I think we'll see some of that in a future video. But it's a process to go back and forth, and we had to avoid stuff like the field drain inlet where the red flag is on the left. So we had to kind of work around a few obstacles anyway, but the full-size tractor was great at just piling stuff together. So it worked out pretty well. Great tool. So do a flyover. This is after we've got everything out of the ditches and piled up, so you can see where it's clear for the most part in the ditch at the south end. Got a lot of tile ending up there, and I've made most of the larger piles. Actually, the one on the right, we've already burned a little bit of that, just kind of as an experimental burn to see how well that was going to work. There's some stuff we haven't pulled out, but we get to that. The larger burn pile with the larger trees on the left, we haven't burned it yet. We still have stuff to push together and pile up on the left and the right. The stuff on the left I pushed onto the large burn pile and ended up with a pretty good size pile to burn. So I think on this shot I don't fly all the way down to the highway bridge at 52, but this kind of gives you an idea both how much was on the side, how I piled it up, and how clear the ditch was when we got done taking or cutting stuff down and then pulling it out. It actually looked like a regular ditch after that. It's pretty good. So at the South Farm, in the middle, a little bit to the west, there was a tree stand. I just show you a Google satellite photographs showing the extent of trees. These trees are in the distance. I'm kind of standing a few hundred yards away from it looking at them. But I went in with the chainsaw and cut all those trees down and then drug them out, similar to what I did with the ditches. This picture just shows that when I cut, a fairly large tree, I used my backhoe to prop it basically so I knew it was going to fall. Got all those taken out and stacked, and then this is pretty much what we were left. It's kind of a tangled mess still left of roots and stumps and crud basically, but a lot of the major work was done. And so got that done, and then I'll have did a flyover just showing the extent of the brush piles, tree piles after I get done. And this is the same center middle woods, as I call it, in the middle of the field. You can still see the stumps that are in there. There's a ravine that's been cut around the bottom part of it. You can still see water in there. It's just from erosion on that side on the right, and then on the top left you have another ravine that's harder to see as a ravine, but it's cut pretty deep. And then you can see the major trees and the stumps that are in there that have not been pulled out yet. And in the next part of the video, we'll show where I had Donnie Anderson, his excavator, come in, and then he pulled out a lot of the stumps and stuff. We're not going to see a lot of it in this video. This is kind of at the end of it where he's pulled out a lot of stuff already, but he uses the heavy bucket part to just go ahead and loosen up and then scoop out the stumps. That's what he's doing right here. He's taking the stump out. He'll shake it to get the loose dirt off because we are going to try to burn these. He'll go through, do that, and then he changed attachments. It's got a rake on it, and then he went through after pulling the stumps and pulled out as much or as many roots as he could. He shakes them all out. But this is so the land can be reclaimed for farming. And so we were able to do that. That area still needs work after working for a year, but Donnie got it pretty well cleared out. And on the next flyover, we'll see how smooth we ended up on that. So you can still see the ravine at the right part of that, but you can see tracks where Donnie's gone, back and forth. But that's pretty well cleared out. We have the major tree and stump brush piles there, which will burn. But that's pretty much what we ended up with. In a future video, we'll actually see where, not future, but in the same video, a little bit further, we'll show where I fill in, add drainage to this ditch ravine to the right, and then fill it in with the backhoe, basically to reclaim that. And, in the months since, some of the rains have started to cut into it a little bit, but we've redirected a lot of that, and it works pretty well. And we've got a plan to make it even better. So like I said, I took the backhoe and basically this is where I filled in the ravine. You can see the drain in the middle of that shot. It's been leveled off here in this shot. We patched a 12-inch tile and then put a 6-inch extension. This is where it's the ravine before I filled it in, but since that was a waterway, I wanted to put a tile in there to kind of soak up the water that came in there. Covered it with pea gravel and then covered the whole thing again, same shot, and then smoothed everything out with a backhoe. So probably took a couple of days to get all that smoothed out and everything, but then we were able to till it, plant it, harvest it, and like I say, I have some more work planned for that. So on the south part of the south farm, there's what they call a sand road, and so there were a lot of, you see the trees right in front along the road. Well, the tree line, they weren't that big, but they extended down to the right along the road. So I came in and walked this and cut all of the trees, and there's honeysuckle bushes and a bunch of vegetation there. So I just went down the road and cut these, and then came in with the Case 580, and instead of towing them out with a chain, I was able to use the 4-in-1 clamp bucket and just grab onto these. You can see the stumps that are left over there. This was actually kind of usually a wet spot too, so it's kind of mucky to work in for a lot of the time. But a lot of trees in this area. Then it was brush, and in some areas where it wasn't too thick. There was a fence line here with barbed wire, an electric fence in here, which we took out. We found rolls of fencing just buried in this brush, which when I took out the brush and we burned it, I found all the wire. I actually didn't see most of it while I was scooping the brush up, so it was kind of interesting. So we're coming to the very southwest part of the South Farm. So again, you can see the stumps, and this is, the timber at the southwest part of the farm, and this is a wet spot too. This is where I stopped. We could certainly take out, clear out that timber, but that's a project for another day. So after cutting the brush along the sand and trees along the sand road, I in my car took my phone basically and just did a kind of a ground close-up showing, before I started really clearing it, showing what I had cut. This is starting from the east and heading west towards the other woods. So as you can see, there wasn't much right there, but then got into a lot of trees. They were, fairly good size and bushy, hard to get at because you had barbed wire, and it was just, you had the honeysuckle there, so it was really hard to access, a lot of crawling around. That was a large tree right there. Pretty thick brush right there. So that's, like I say, heading all the way down to the other wooded area. So this probably took a week or so to get through this with my 18-inch chainsaw. So that was a lot of work until we got to the other tree line. And I said, that's enough, and we'll save this other stuff for another day, a lot larger trees. So I didn't come away unscathed from this. A couple interesting shots here. I talked about there being barbed wire, and barbed wire is embedded in the trees, which made it actually difficult to get in. And at the west end of the sand road, I actually had a little bit of a situation where the one tree fell over behind me and then pulled me into my chainsaw. So it cut my jeans. I knew that was bad, so that's kind of blood and cut jeans. I ended up getting 7 staples out of that, 1 internal stitch for the muscle, but it just barely missed the bone, so that's where there could have been trouble. So they got it all cleaned up. I ordered Kevlar pants here on the emergency room table. So, all right, so also, to continue clearing stuff just north or just south of the tool shed, there's another set of woods. And so between the farmland and the woods, there's a fence line you can see coming down here. And the brush has been steadily from the fence line encroaching into the field without being turned back. So I went in and started cutting this brush back to kind of reclaim the more farmland. And right now I'm just driving along the tree line basically where I cut this brush. And again, I just let it fall here and then ended up basically pushing this back against the fence to take out later. Some of that later was this year, but I still need to get to that project. So one of the purposes of this is actually to control water that's coming from the woods. There's a lot of water in those beat up areas, swampy areas that's coming from the woods over the top of the farmland, pooling right in front of the ditch. So this is some of the water coming out of the farmland. So this is the goal, is to clear this out and then probably cut some sort of ditch to intercept the water and direct it where we want it to go, into a drain. As part of the 8-inch tile work, master tile work that we'll see later in this video. But basically I went from end to end, we've taken all that fencing off. So we'll be putting new fencing back in.
This was all brush
Now, I did pull out this area that was full of brush. I pulled some junk out. So that was covered with honeysuckle, so I cut that out and cleared it. It's grown back a little bit. I've cleared it a little bit too. I'd like to start mowing that so it's an area where we can actually use it. So, after we piled all this stuff, just a few, videos of burning. This is from the middle field where we had some large stumps and such. This is after things are burned out. It was actually near the south end of the ditch. Where the huge burn pile has pretty much been reduced to not much. So this is along the sand road, some of the piles we had. I would actually let the pile burn quite a bit till it was down to still burning, but then I would take the backhoe and pile it on top, and then that would basically reignite it and make it so that we could get rid of the whole pile. So that worked pretty well, but then we had stumps that were left over, so some very large stumps. So as you can see here, this is from the middle woods, so I had to take those with my dump trailer and basically took that mess and put it into a separate dumpster. As I said before, there was a lot of fence wire that was buried in the brush, and I saw after we got done with the burnt pile, there's a lot of wire left over. So basically put that in and most of this from a sand road, took that up in my dumpster or in my dump trailer up to the dumpster, and then we just loaded it in there and got rid of it. So, all right, moving to a different topic, I wanted to check the condition of the existing tile. So we rented a 200-foot tile probe. Matt has a camera end. You can see the reel in the back of the Kubota RTV. So basically,
right.
Matt would go down to the tile end. He's excited about that. There's one of the stumps we just cut off. And then he's going to work his way down there.
All right, just walk over it.
It's a little slippery.
Step on it. There you go.
And then, so he's going to go to the end of the tile. There's a rodent gate in there, but we found that we were able to take the camera
Might be a little muddy
and basically walk in the mud and feed the camera through the tile
All right.
rodent gate, and then the
other one started out a little bit muddy.
the cable is basically thick enough that you could shove that through, and you could actually
Lift up?
it's stout enough you could shove it as far as you could go. So we would typically
All right,
go
let's start the generator.
like 75, 150 feet.
All right, we're ready.
And I had a generator in the back of
Go
the
ahead,
MTV.
start shoving.
He would basically shove that there, and then there was a monitor where I would check the condition of the pipe as it went
Can't
through.
see much.
You can see
We have a
roughly.
joint there.
We go in there and
Going
you
corrugated.
can see the condition of the tile. We're basically
Transitioning
transitioning
to clay tile
clay
right
tile
there.
from the plastic, and really didn't see anything right there, but there were areas where there was some brush in there. We looked at some corrugated tile. That one's clear, but there were cement tile. You can see that one's started to separate in that picture, and then in the next picture you can see it's totally separating. So you get any pressure in that line, and it just you end up with a pothole or a big hole in the ground. So when we had a significant rain, I would go up and fly my drone. This is after a pretty big rain, and this is on the north field looking south, but you can get an idea about water sitting on adjacent farms to the left, or ours is to the middle and right, where you can see the ditch, which is actually, it's maybe kind of hard to see, but the ditch is pretty full. It's had a lot of water in it, so you can see where the water's ponding. A lot of the water is coming, if you look middle left, it's coming from the Zabel field. There's a culvert there, and then the water just comes right out of that onto our field. We did fix that problem. That was a district tile outlet into our ditch, and then the picture before that was a district tile pothole that had broke. So one thing I wanted to do, we had ponds. I wanted to see how hard it would be to, pump these out, knowing that they're going to fill right back up. So I did set up a pump and several hundred feet, 600 feet of 2-inch PVC, and pumped out a couple of these areas just to see, get an idea of, what it would take, how much drainage we have, how deep is this and such. So it was a decent size effort, but I learned quite a bit. This is on the north field, an inlet, 6-inch inlet that was totally blocked and didn't work. So when we pumped, this is just a little video of how fast the water came out from the pump, and this is after we pumped out a big big pond. So like I say, a couple of on the north side, there's a 15-inch district tile that had a lot of breaks in it. I repaired 3 of them. These are just pictures from one of them, where I take my backhoe, dig out the old tile, dig it back to a point where I could, put rubber connectors on like you see there, get it prepared. Those images are reversed, actually. But anyway, and then a little bit of video showing the flow going through there.
Both ends.
One of the previous pictures showed the rubber boots on.
Worked the dirt from around the ends by hand. With
And
the shovel.
then once I got that
So now I'm
prepped
ready
and
to
put the boots
the
on,
rubber
then
couplings
I would put a
on the
piece
existing
of
tile.
corrugated, as you see there, and then put stainless steel bands around each connection. So when I got that done, for the larger connections, so that they'd be stable, I brought in some pea gravel. We dumped a load near the crib, and then loaded it up in the Kubota. Used the Kubota loader to put it in the back of the RTV, which has a dump function, and then brought it to the field, as you see here, and then loaded it with the backhoe, basically, and then brought it in and kind of backfilled the tile connection. This is just some of the tile that came out of it. So use the RTV. It's a great 4-wheel drive vehicle to get to the district pothole in the middle of the field, and then just backed up to the hole and dumped it, and went ahead and put dirt, filled in the rest of the dirt. So farming and pea gravel, but pea gravel is really good for stabilizing the connection, as you see there. Then I use a Kubota, like I say, to fill all that in and smooth it out, and then you have a completed repair, one of 3 or several. So some other work that we did, there were a lot of field inlets that were old, beat up, plowed under, unused like this. That did zero good right there. So I took that out. Could see it took a 4-inch connection. So I basically, that's another
March
shot of a different
27th,
one.
2018.
But took the Kubota,
Field inlet.
basically dug all that out, dug down to the 4-inch tile,
There, can't say anything else. Let's dig that up. But
and then
wouldn't hurt to
put a
4
connector on
goes
that,
down, it wouldn't hurt to put a
and then
field inlet.
brought the tile back up to grade. The next shot's going to show, having dug it out with the smaller Kubota backhoe, and then put a fitting on that, and then I put a yellow field inlet in that, and and I completed that repair. So for some reason, I was working out there, and there was a very large skunk scurrying along. It was pretty good size, so I just kind of thought I'd not have anything to do with anything. But so on the south end, or south farm, there's another district tile that was broken, and this is at the ravine in the middle woods. So there's concrete on one end and then plastic on the other, and probably, well, you can see the distance, it's like 20 some feet in between, basically 15 or 20. So I put a new tile in there, put the connectors on, and then basically I had shown that I put a 6-inch connector going off to the left in that ravine, but then put that back and repaired that. So there was another repair on the south farm, going to the ditch. There was a wet spot there, and I found that that tile was completely collapsed. It was zero good. So I dug that out, replaced it with a new 6-inch tile. This is a tile that I could actually hook onto going to the ditch. But there was just a pretty much collapsed clay tile, and I saw that all the way through. It's one of my workers, Cole. We got done after a very long, dirty day. So one of the other projects I worked on was demolishing the barn, which was literally being held up with, and we'll see it in a shot here, with cabling. Very unstable. My kids played in it, and it was very dangerous and scary. Still a bit of junk in it and stuff, but and this is a cable that literally held one end of the barn, corner of the barn up. So contracted with Donnie Anderson to come back in and take it out. So we took out, this small tree next to it first, just to clear everything out. Obviously the excavator doesn't even feel the size of the tree. It's got awesome power. So he came through and then started by taking out center support, just to kind of get a feel for how easy it was going to be to knock this thing down. And the whole process took a few hours to get this down. We're not going to see the whole thing, but he got it down to a certain extent, and then started peeling the roof off so that we could salvage that and recycle it. But it's an interesting process. A little bit more full bore there, but it's always fun to watch demolition. He's working on a concrete slab with the lead in place. It was in decent shape, so got it down. Like I say, started peeling off roof sections. It turns out that the roof section was attached with so many fasteners that it was difficult to peel off individual sections of the tin roof. Now, he was able to do it to a large degree, but it was not as easy as he thought it might be. It didn't come off that easily. So he ended up taking off the bucket and then grabbing each piece with a little clamp at the end of the excavator. That worked pretty well. So he's like, well, can we just, tip this whole thing over here? And yeah, pretty much shift it. The end that was held up in the cable just kind of collapsed there. So it was a block, short wall, and that was, real easy to demolish. So did a great job, of course, on it. And a little bit later, we'll see the piles of debris that are somewhat separated out that we ended up with. So after he took the barn down and took that off of the slab, he took out the barn slab. He was taking out the footing. I don't think a lot of slab work here, but it ended up being two slabs, one on top of another, separated by a layer of sand. So the first layer of slab had pretty much collapsed, and they poured sand over it, poured another layer of concrete. So we took out both of those, and Donnie, of course, was working for as long as he was to get it done, so this extended well into to get it done. He's pretty much a superman, running an excavator and dropping. So after we got done with the demolition, like I say, Donnie had it separated into piles. This is the two slabs from the barn. Then we had basically there's behind this pile is actually wood. There's more of the slabs from the barn. We ended up just burning those. This is the barn itself on the other side. But we had a big fire and got rid of that. And then I had a recycle company come in and set a dumpster, and we were able to get rid of most of the metal. So while Donnie was there, we did have a large dead tree. It was just east of the farmhouse. So he said, well, if I can take care of that. And so he just brought his excavator over and took it over. It was pretty easy. Scooped out the rotten base, and that was done. So yeah, one of the major projects is designing new tile. infrastructure. So we had old 67 maps to go with showing some of the tile. We went through and I made an AutoCAD map and overlaid some imagery, and then kind of field verified a lot of this tile, made notes on it and such. I did have an estimate because I was able to, measure the areas that were being damaged by flooding, and just in this one instance, this is how much area we were losing: 23 acres, about $16,000 worth every year that we had bad rain. So I made a new design with 8-inch tile on both fields, north and south, put it out for bids, and then Levex ended up doing this. Chris Shires brought in his very large tile laying machine. Did a great job. So first step was to dig out the ditch to put in the outlet tile. So that's what we're doing here with the Kubota excavator. Determining the grade and then digging this out. And that's Jason Wilson at the controls of the Kubota. And this is at the South Farm. We're basically here digging a trench and putting a tile going to the woods south of the tool shed. But again, all of the tile that we saw was, existing tile was in very bad shape and collapsed. So after we get done putting the inlet or outlet to the ditch in place and basically excavating a start point, then Chris would come in with his tile machine, and basically that's what they call an 8-inch boot that he would lower into place. And then they would put the tile that's on the roll that out, and then feed the other along the path, and then feed the other end into the tile machine, as you can see here. And we've gone a little ways from the ditch. And then you just get started, stabilize one end of the tile until the ground started filling back in on top of the tile to hold it in place, and then you didn't have to run the mess. Then you would just run the tile machine according to the computerized calculated grade, and you'd have GPS on the machine, which would install the tile, lay it in place, within a few fractions of an inch at the correct rate. So we know that we have good tile at the proper grade, and on the size that we come in and make our lateral connection with some future point to the tile. And we know the process goes really fast. So this is back on the north farm. We actually decided to put in another connection to go up to another culvert that was coming over from the Zabel farm and pick up the water there. So basically, we're cutting a T into the 8-inch that we have just put in. Chris has just finished that. So he's bringing his machine back over to connect into the T and then run it to the other culvert where we put another surface headlight. Yeah. So as you can see, the ground was pretty wet already. This is, the new tile has dried this out quite a bit. It's done a great job. It takes a lot of manhandling to get the tile in and put it in position, keep it in position. Ready to go. So he's made the connection, and now Chris is laying the line back in and over to the other culvert crossing of the east road on the north side. So actually I only did this because we had about 700 feet of tile left over. This is one of the last ones we did, and it's one of the best uses of extra tile that I could have come up with, because it really made a big difference. So they'll backfill this. They'll use a bobcat with a blade on it to pile the dirt over the tile. And then it's settled, over the winter for a few months, and then we're able to till over it and then go ahead and plant over it. It was settled enough that it was stable. So after I got done, I did a flyover with the drone. This is actually on Drone Deploy, software app that I use. But basically, this is the north on the top, south on the bottom, and then you could see the shortly and quickly where we had cut in the tile before we get it plowed over. So the next project, we haven't done this yet, but the 15-inch tile on the north side has had several potholes. I showed some pictures of repairing that. Repaired 3 or 4 places. So this is documentation to get that tile replaced, and we're working on that right now. I've made up plans. We've actually gotten bids, but we have to redo a couple of things. But this is from the bidding package where I show some of the actual damage, basically, and the proposed path and distances and such. So hopefully that project will happen this fall of 2019, and then we won't have these type of issues where we get holes in the ground and then the water basically puddles up in a different location because we're not really collecting it. So one of the other projects I did, we had trouble having stable power at the crib where I had my networking gear. So I took a trencher. This is a corner of the southwest corner of the crib. So I took a trencher, went across the lane and up to the house power pole and connected into the power there. And then put some outlets at the crib. The other thing I did actually before I did that was to install solar power because the power was uneven. So I put 6 panels on the roof and then had a set of batteries and solar controls and switches where I could get power. I had monitoring gear and I had a camera on there so I could actually check in and see, what the status was of the solar system. So the next step was to put in power to a tower from the crib. And this week, we installed the tower. We'll see that a little bit later. But, we put up the tower and then we worked to see the tower in the distance, so we'll talk about that. But I needed power and internet cables, so I trenched that over. That worked great. So before I installed the tower, I had to take it from my cousin's farm about a mile away. They had a TV tower. The house is slated for demolition. So this is me and my lift taking the tower apart section by section. So we took it apart and then loaded it in my truck. Basically, it's my daughter Jessica taking the video. Came apart. It wasn't too bad. Just had like 6 bolts in each section. Took those out. Then took those over to our farm, and then we'll see a little bit later where we dug a base. We put in 1,200 pounds of concrete and reinforcing bar, and then we set the bottom section of the tower in there, put a little thing around it that we could fill it with the rest of it with concrete, a rebar conduit coming up, and then assemble the rest of the tower. And then on top of the tower, put a junction box to connect all my cables and power, and then ended up installing next to the junction box the dish for our internet service going to Donovan, a 360 camera. And then that picture shows a weather station on top with a lightning rod protecting everything. Right there is a good shot of all that. So that worked out pretty well. The only other work that we've done, really, or major work, is extending the 8-inch tile that Chris put in up into the woods. And then we put a field inlet there to collect the water coming from the woods. And that's done a pretty good job. And that pretty much summarizes the work we've done for the last 2 years.